So I was doing some research for a commentary I wanted to do for this season, and it was on the topic called the heap of sand paradox. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's also called Sorites paradox, and I think that it has a lot to do or shows a lot of things about how Go works. And so I decided, hey, why don't I ask ChatGPT what it thinks? And I asked it the question, in light of the paradox of the heap of sand, how do you think this paradox can help us understand how the game of Go works? And ChatGPT gave this response. The heap of sand paradox can provide insight into understanding the game of Go, particularly in how concepts of incremental changes and thresholds apply in both contexts. Number one, incremental decisions. Just as each grain of sand added to a pile brings you incrementally closer to a heap, each move in Go adds complexity and potential towards achieving victory. Understanding that small, seemingly insignificant moves can accumulate into significant change is vital in both the paradox and the game. Very good so far. I thought that was spot on. 2, vagueness in strategy. In Go, the line between a good and a bad position can often be vague and hard to define. Like the heap of sand, strategic positions gradually shift from advantageous to disadvantageous, and understanding where and how that shift occurs requires insight similar to examining the threshold of when sand becomes a heap. Pretty good. Good enough. 3rd, emergent properties. The paradox highlights emergent properties, how the addition of individual grains eventually creates a, quote, heap. Similarly, in Go, the emergent property of control or influence over the board arises from individual moves, shaping the overall game landscape. This actually reminds me a lot of my conversation with Frank Lance, the game designer, and he talked about how the reason Go is so great is because it has that quality of emergence. And then the 4th thing that ChatGPT said, connecting Go with the heap of sand paradox, is continuous evaluation. Just as we struggle to determine the exact point a heap is formed, players must constantly evaluate the board's state to perceive shifts in power dynamics, making decisions based on an evolving situation. And then it gives a little bit of a summary. It says, though the analogy isn't perfect, the heap of sand paradox helps illustrate how accumulation, emergence, and the intricacies of judgment play crucial roles in the strategy-based game of Go. Both require an understanding of how small individual elements contribute to the broader picture, influencing either philosophical understanding or game outcome. I was pretty impressed. I don't know about you. It was a very articulate way to combine those two concepts. So with that, we will get the show started. This is All Things Go. Now I'm going to play for you an interview I did with Gabe, who is also known as Strugglebus Go or Strugglebus on his YouTube channel. I originally connected with him through his YouTube content, thought it was really good. He was also offering insights and things when I had game reviews and such, because he really likes to give back to the Go community. And through that, we were able to start to have some conversation and connect a little bit. And it led to the opportunity for me to actually get to have the interview with him. And man, I was so glad I got to learn more about him because he just has a fascinating background. So we're going to go ahead and jump over to that interview. Gabe, or Strugglebus Go, as they call you, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
We know each other because I reached out to you about taking lessons and learning from you, but also because of your channel. And so I'm really glad that I asked for a little bit of a background and a bio because it's fascinating. So maybe we can start there. You have a long history with board games, which is really cool. So tell us about how you got into playing chess at 4 years of age.
I guess I was kind of just like a natural born gamer. And so my dad has played chess his entire life. And as with, just like all little kids, I'm very interested in what my parents were doing, right? And so I saw my dad playing chess, and so I wanted to play. And at the time, it started off with, me taking the pieces and rolling marbles at them because, again, a little kid there. But then one day I asked him to play, and I was 4 at the time, and he was like, "No, no, I can't teach this to a 4-year-old." And then my mom was like, "Ah, just teach him. You know, he'll get bored of the game and he'll move on." But then the opposite happened, and I absolutely just grabbed right onto it and loved it. And so, yeah, so I just played a ton with him. And then, once I was old enough to start going to tournaments, that's what I did. And so, yeah, I went to my first tournament at age 6,
Wow.
and then played up until probably I was around 14. At that point in time, most of my friends had stopped playing, and the tournaments started shifting from 1-day events to 2-day events, and they were just getting a little too stressful for 14-year-old Gabe, especially since my friends weren't there. And so I, just slowly stopped playing, but it was obviously a big part of my life for a long while. I then, eventually found my way to Magic the Gathering. I've always been the kind of person where I have a lifestyle game. There's the games I play on the side that I still absolutely enjoy, but for me, it's important to have something that you can devote devotion and energy to. And so, yeah, at first that was chess. And then I, got into Magic the Gathering around college. And then right at the end of college and afterwards, I played really competitively for a long while and had some success and, played on the Pro Tour a bit and, literally traveled the world to play for a couple of years. So that was really fun. Eventually that stopped. And then in 2010, I was introduced to Go, and I've really never turned back. Once I found that game, I was like, at the end, this is going to be it. This is the game I'm going to eventually settle on, even if it's not right now. And it's been obviously a fairly large staple in my life.
So what was that first interaction with Go? How did that come about?
Ironically, it's funny. One of my coworkers in 2007, I think, came over for a board game night. I had board game nights then because I didn't have kids. He brought his Go board, and I had no interest in it. It was just really, I just completely blew it off. And then 2 or 3 years later, a good friend of mine was playing with his friend. He's like, "Oh, Gabe, come take a look at this. You'll love this game." And I just instantly fell in love with it. And I was like, "Oh, this is what the other guy was trying to show me." I'm like, now I feel really bad. So I had to reach out to him and apologize because it's like he tried introducing this to me. So my first real dive in was a friend of mine who also got me into climbing. So he had the same person who got me
Oh my gosh.
into both of my main passions.
A watershed
Yeah.
friend.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there were 3 of us. It was, 2 noobs and a 5 don. And yeah, and then I remember from the first game, came from a chess background. Obviously, controlling the center of the board is important. So a natural born Go player as black. I played Tengen on my first ever placed stone.
First of all, I want to say that I love it. Almost feels very healthy the way that you transitioned out of chess. You're like, hey, I'm 14 years old. I want to have fun and do other things. Maybe this isn't what I want to be doing, but I'm sure you were also gauging, all right, this is where I am, like skill wise. This is where clearly you were good at it because you'd been doing it for some time. And then you transitioned. It was one of those things where when I heard that you were going on the Pro Tour for Magic the Gathering, I was just like, this is so cool. Who gets to say, hey, by the way, like I got to go and do one of these games on like some form of a professional tour? Where did it take you to? Were there any cool places that you're like, oh, this was a cool place?
Oh yeah, for sure. I totally lucked out. So for those of you who don't know Magic the Gathering, it's a tradable collectible card game. It's been around since like 1995, and it's large enough that they have a pro tour. The payouts to the winners are like $50,000. So it's not a ton of money, but
I didn't realize that.
it's
Yeah.
real money. But anyway, so it's really hard to get onto the pro tour. It takes a lot of grinding, especially back in the day in New England, because there was just a large concentration of strong players there. So I played for years. And the way it was back then is there were 3 pro tours, one for each of the major continents. So North America, Asia, and Europe. And it'd be like Pro Tour Chicago and Pro Tour Berlin and whatnot. Nothing too fancy. But then one day, the Wizards of the Coast, who's the company who owns Magic, they wanted to jazz things up. And so they made this big announcement. They're like, we are now going to make Pro Tours even cooler, and we're going to be holding them in really nice locations that you're going to be excited to go to. And so I happened to win a qualifier for the very first one of those pro tours. So this was for the North American one. So instead of going to, Pro Tour Philadelphia or Chicago, it was Pro Tour Honolulu.
Oh gosh.
So starting there, I got to go to Honolulu, Geneva, and Valencia. They had events, right? Like we went to Geneva and they're like, okay, you guys get to go skiing for free in the French Alps if you want. And I was like, yeah, I'll sign up for that. Yeah. And then, Valencia was held in this like world recognized aquarium. And so we got to like get these free tours of the aquarium. Like it was really neat to fall into that groove during that time when that was happening. So yeah, so I definitely got to see some cool places.
That's really cool. And so you, in 2010, you really got involved with Go. you were very big into KGS, the online server, which you said was really during its heyday. You would have multiple players that would be watching games, reviewing games before, after. You really enjoyed that process. And then you played more or less a game almost every single day for a year. And that took you from beginner all the way to 4Q, which is incredible. Tell me just about that process.
Yeah, I mean, I dove in hard, and a big part of it, I didn't have kids at the time, and my wife was in grad school, and she was very, very busy with grad school. So there were plenty of days where I'd be coming home, and she'd be too busy. So it wasn't like I was spending a lot of time. So I had an excuse to have a big time sink in my life. I would either do it when I got home, or in the evening. I would play a game, have that game reviewed, and then maybe play a second game. I did that almost every single day for an entire year. So while it sounds really impressive that I was able to get to 4K after a year, that came with, no joke, probably 300 reviews of games, right? And
Wow.
so it's so, for me anyway, it was so easy to progress when I had that immediate feedback from stronger players after every
Yes.
single game I played. Back in 2010, KGS was a really popular server, and there was a big community there. You could tell that it was a pretty tight-knit community, and like I said, I would just be playing a game, and it was very common for there to be 3 or 4 spectators, watching this random 14K play. And at the end of the game, there'd be 1 or 2, 1 Dan, 2 Dan players, and be like, "Hey, are you guys interested in a review?" There were 2 teachers in particular who were on a lot. And so I got consistent feedback, right, from the same teacher. So
Wow.
it's not like I was getting pulled in different directions.
Maybe we can shift a little bit to your streaming and your YouTube channel, because that's how I first got exposed to you. You were saying in a little bit of your background that you were teaching and giving lessons, and you're just getting feedback that you had a really nice, calm way and very systematic, methodical way of sort of approaching and explaining things that were really helpful. And you had a friend that was streaming, and you said, well, why shouldn't I do it? Is that how it went?
Yeah, pretty much. So, I'm a big proponent of giving back to the community, right? So I mentioned that being on KGS, I got all these reviews by people who were just doing it because they enjoyed doing it, right? And so I
Sure.
wanted to give back. So I did the same thing. I stalked KGS games. I would log on and I would look for, a 10K, 12K game that was close to finished. So that night I would just go watch the last 5 minutes, and then I would ask them if they want a review. And so I was doing this. And so I met a number of people this way and helped give reviews and lessons and whatnot. And yeah, one particular person who, I became friends with after, helping him out for a year, and he got just as strong as I did, he started streaming. And I was like, oh, if he could figure this out, I can figure this out. And so, yeah, so I set everything up, and I was totally ready to just be talking to myself because, who's just going to watch a streamer on day one? You have to start somewhere. And I'm like, okay, I am mentally prepared to just talk to myself. But fortunately, with Twitch, when you stream, you can say what game you're streaming. So I showed up as a Go streamer, right? And so yeah, even on my very first stream, I still had 4 or 5 people, which blew my mind. I was like, "Whoa!" I was expecting zero. So that
That's so
was
great.
so that was really nice. And yeah, and it was really clunky back then and really bad, but it was my start. And then I was streaming for a long while before before I transitioned to
YouTube
YouTube.
channel.
At the time, I became more active on Reddit, and I'm sure most of the listeners here will recognize me from there because that's where people seem to know me other than YouTube. And so I was finding people to, anytime new players popped up and I had time, I'd reach out to give, initial lessons or introductions to the game. And I had my list of basic rules. So anybody's familiar with the channel knows the Strugglebus basic rules. But there was somebody who I helped out, and yeah, he said, you have a really calm demeanor. You present this in a really clear and calm way. If you just figured out some basic video editing, you could make some good content. And so I gave that some thought, and I was like, oh, I've got my basic rules. And then I recognized that there was kind of a hole in the genre of our little game where there weren't a lot of videos out there for newer players, right? There were videos for brand new
Mhm.
players and
Yes.
videos for people like you and me, but not so much in the middle, right? That 15K range, that 10 to
Yes.
15K range. And I'm only so strong, right? I'm currently 2K on OGS. So if you're looking for strong advice, I'm not the guy you're going to. But 15K players, they don't need to be learning from 4 Dans.
Right.
because somebody like me can help them plenty. So I was like, okay, that will be my little niche, just targeting the double digit Q players and giving them access to some more material. So yeah, so then it just kind of progressed from there, and eventually it started going well enough, and I used money from lessons to get some actual equipment. There was a big jump in video quality. And it's kind of funny looking back now because the original basic videos I
Oh my
do
gosh.
is on the old recording setup, and it looks so hack compared to what it is now. It gets to the point where I'm like, do I need to re-record these? But yeah, I'm just keeping them there for just like
Yeah.
historical purposes.
I can really attest to the fact that it did feel like there was somewhat of a gap out there. I mean, there are definitely other personalities and content providers that are phenomenal and do a great job. But I found myself, as you know, in that spot too, right? Where my rank was and the way that you were laying it out and explaining and going through the games and thinking through every step at that level and providing rules was really helpful. And also, you have your particular strengths. Is it fair to say that you have a little bit more of that fighting mentality, perhaps, or a little more aggressive style, where you really don't like to use thickness and things in the middle of the board? Or maybe that's where you feel like you excel. Is that fair?
Yeah, I definitely didn't start there, right? For all new players, maybe not all, but I'd like to think the majority of new players struggle with influence in general because the player
Yes.
who's getting territory is getting immediate gains. It's very clear what they're getting, but then influence turns into just a big old question mark. I certainly didn't start there. In the past probably 2 years, I noticed a slow transition into first starting to appreciate what you can do with influence. It is clearly my trend, my preference to take influence and play an influential game, because yeah, you're going to get fighting in all games. But I like having the influence because then you've got better control of the fights, and fighting is probably my favorite part of the game. It feels natural to be the player, to play the role of the aggressor and controlling the fights.
I love it. The road rage videos have been just made for a really nice change of pace. You have these different lines of videos for different things. Like now I love that you have the sort of the beyond the basics, which has really been helpful for me. How did you come up with the struggle bus concept and naming?
So I've always enjoyed the term struggle bus. I just think it's a funny term.
Yeah.
When I first started streaming, I was just using, my avatar name on all the servers, which is Go Gabe Go. But
Right.
that's not like that's kind of a lame streaming name. So I wanted to come up with a concept other than just having me playing Go, right? I wanted there to be an aesthetic there. And so yeah, so I decided to come up with the struggle bus, tongue in cheek, pointing to the fact that Go is just a really hard game, right? And we're all just struggling to try to figure this out. And then I was able to get like a good aesthetic and a background for the videos within. So I was really happy with where that landed.
I love the every move or every game is an empty triangle.
Every wheel is an empty triangle.
I love the tongue in cheek concept. And I also like when you just start to get entertaining on some of your videos. So Easter videos was Gabe showing up in like a pink bunny rabbit suit. And it's like, I'm not expecting this at all.
Yeah, I do actually put a lot of effort into trying to be entertaining, right? And Go is we all enjoy it, but it's a pretty dry concept, right? And so sometimes it's tough to watch videos just because of how dry they are. Yeah, they're entertaining, they're meaningful for us, but they can be dry. I try to liven things up a little bit and be a little goofy at times just to interject some humor, and not everybody appreciates it, and that's fine. My videos don't need to be for everybody.
I find it very much appreciated. And even if it's something that somebody wouldn't like, I feel like you could still appreciate and say, okay, you know what? He's trying something. Let's transition a little bit, Gabe, to the somewhat unique opportunity to take sort of a sabbatical from work, and you've been able to focus on other things. And one of those things that I believe you were telling me you were looking to prioritize was really your focus on Go, not only from a personal study and improvement perspective, but also from a content perspective. So can you just tell us a little bit about like, how has that been going? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I've decided to take this summer off. I have two young children, obviously. They go to school and they have summers off, and my wife now works in a school system, and so she has summers off. And so last year, the seed got planted because my son asked me when my summer was going to start, because, the rest of the family was off. That kind of hit like daggers. Shortly thereafter, a really good friend of mine took a 6-month sabbatical from work. And I was like, oh, I'm like, so maybe this is just a thing and, I can consider it for next summer. And then from a work standpoint, it just happens to line up that I had a good opportunity to take the time off without it being like too detrimental to my career or my position within the company that I work at. And so it just lined up well enough. And so I decided to take 4 months off and focus on spending time with the family. Also, obviously, focusing on my hobbies as well, primarily Go and climbing. One of the difficulties with me and Go is, I've kind of spread myself thin. That's not a bad thing, but it's impossible to fully engage in studying if I also want to create videos and teaching. And the thing is, like I legitimately enjoy doing all of these things. I legitimately enjoy producing the videos, right? And I legitimately enjoy teaching, and I obviously love to play. But if I focused on just playing and studying, then I'm kind of giving up on the other side of it, and that I don't really consider that acceptable. I have been able to study more. I feel like I've gotten stronger. Of course, my rank hasn't changed.
No, did
Whenever
you
you're
go up on OGS?
so I never really took my OGS account seriously.
Seriously, yeah.
And so I never really like put in the effort to get ranked there. So my account always was sitting around 3K with an understanding of I was probably a 2K player. And so I reached 2K and I'm on my way to 1K, but I don't, I still think I'm pretty far away, but that'd be a pretty big milestone for me. Obviously the goal is to get 1 Dan. Originally that was on KGS, but honestly, I'm not sure that if there's too much of a difference between 1K on KGS and OGS these days. It's hard for me to tell. But either way, I am seeing improvements. But no, it's definitely been a positive experience.
That's really cool. Let's go to a little bit of a lightning round. Who is your favorite player of all time and why?
I'll go with Cho Chikun. He just seems like a funny guy. I don't know. Have you seen the tea stealing to Suji?
Yes, I have. Can you explain what that is?
So I don't know who he's playing against, right? But it's the
Okay.
professional setup where they've got the two commentators behind on the pedestal, and he's in deep thought and goes to grab tea, but he doesn't grab his tea. He grabs one of the commentators' teas and just takes it and starts drinking. And she's like, "Well, I guess that's my life now," and was recorded, right? So it's just a very funny moment.
So I spent a year living in China, and it may be completely different, but my sense was that in Eastern cultures, this concept of honor and tradition and sort of following what is expected, my sense is that that's a bit more rigid than it is here. So for him to up and sort of do that, just I imagine it must have been quite shocking, but it's fun to
Yeah.
watch. Yeah, it's really fun to watch. And what's the play on words with saying Tsuji?
Yeah, so the Tsuji. So obviously we have Tsuji, which is a term, a beloved term in our Go community, talking about basically finding a sharp play or a sharp sequence of moves. Tsuji plays right into that.
And then the other play on the word is a time suji, right? As
Yep.
well. What is that?
So time Suji, I'm a big fan of time Suji. So time Suji is when you're in Biyomi and you need some time to think about a move, but 30 seconds isn't going to be enough. Basically, what you do is you waste a co-threat and it resets your time. So, it's a meaningless move. It doesn't do anything, but it demands a response. It resets your Biyomi. And so that is a time Suji.
I love it. Okay, next question. What would be your ideal setting to play a game of Go?
This is a bucket list item of mine. I still really, really want to do this. I want to take a vacation to Korea. I mean, it looks like a beautiful country to begin with. But I want to find a park, one of the stereotypical parks where you got all the old guys, smoking their cigarettes, playing Go, and then just like somehow find a way to play a game against a random old guy and probably get my butt whooped. That is my ideal setting. I really enjoy playing in person. I really enjoy playing outside. I like the outdoors in general. And so, I can't think of anything better than just, sitting in a beautiful park, nice autumn weather, playing a
Yes.
game of Go.
What's the worst piece of advice you may have heard about learning Go?
So this doesn't just apply to Go. I think this applies to everything. There's no one way to do anything or to learn anything. I always get a little frustrated at how common it is for new players. I see this a lot on Reddit and other online forums where they ask like, "Oh, what can I do to improve?" And the answers are, "Do more Samego, do more Samego, do more Samego." And like that isn't the answer, right? Like that might, for the person responding, that might be what helped them. But there are a lot of people out there where that just simply is not the answer. Doing more Samego is not going to stop you from playing empty triangles or self Ataris. Maybe that's not the answer there. So I think it's going to be different for everybody, right? Everybody learns in
Sure.
different ways. That's one of the things I learned early as a teacher is recognizing that, you need to adjust your teaching style based on the student, right? If you're teaching in a way and they're not understanding it, it's on you to change your teaching style and not the other way around. So yeah, that's the big misconception is there's, everybody's too quick to say this is the way, the other one you'll get is study professional games. That's all you need to do. And it's like, no, that's not all you need to do. That might have been what helped you, but that's, there's obviously much more to it than that.
And I bet a lot of it also has to do with cultural context, right? You might do that in certain cultures. Hey, look at all the professional games, or just keep kind of hammering home problems and life and death and sumago, but that might not be for everybody. What about any ways that you've seen recently from other things, chess, other sports areas of society that might help towards making Go a little more popular in the West that you just haven't seen done in a significant way?
Unfortunately, I'm pretty pessimistic on it because I think
No.
chess has the foothold for the people who are interested in that type of game, right? So
Mm,
obviously, we can draw very clear parallels between chess and Go in terms of the demographic of people who would enjoy these games, right? They're
mhm.
both lifestyle games. They're both pure strategy, no luck. So there's a certain type of person who's drawn to that. And at least in the West, everybody knows what chess is. And so I'm a little pessimistic on that. That said, I'm a big proponent of, fostering the community. I do intend on when the kids are older, starting up probably a chapter and doing some tournament organization because that's the biggest thing that we're missing as a community is regular tournaments. Small tournaments that you can go to on a Saturday or a Sunday where 20 people show up, you play for 6 hours and you go home, right? Chess has a lot of tournaments like that. As somebody who played competitive chess, I know the events that are out there. And, within New England, within probably an hour drive, I could probably find a tournament every single weekend or at least every single month. And that just simply isn't true for Go, right? I have access
Mm,
to about two of them a year that are within 2 hours of my house. And both of them are multi-day events, right? So they're really hard to get to. But you need the community to be able to
right.
support those kind of tournaments. And so it's kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg type thing. But yeah,
Yes.
unfortunately, I think the grasp that chess has just makes it tough for the smaller game to rise up.
Do you feel like there's any particular trend? I feel like I've come across quite a few Go players that started with chess and then they eventually went to Go. Obviously, as you said, there's a lot of similarities in the game as much as there are a lot of differences. Because you played quite competitively and seriously with chess earlier on in your life, do you find that there's something that might be happening across a lot of chess players that make the leap to Go?
I'm not so sure about that. In my case, I hadn't played chess in many years.
Mm,
So it was always back there and I'd always be willing to play, but I was never going to dive back in competitively. And so I think Go was just, for me, it was something new that scratched the same exact itch. Then got drawn in because I was able to progress through it, right? That's one thing that, would be tough to get back into chess is that I wouldn't be progressing, right? I'd be a little bit weaker than I was where I started, but I'd already be at a point where it'd be tough to progress. As there with Go, it's like, every single week I was stronger than the week before, right? So that's what pulled me in. In terms of chess players going over to Go, I'd be curious to see what percentage of, at least in the West, what percentage of players who played Go started with chess, because I imagine it has to be really high. And so for me, I consider Go to be the better game. I like it in every way. I think it's more elegant. I just think it's a better game. With that said, chess is obviously still a fantastic game. Plays, has a huge place in my heart. So I'm not detracting from chess at all. But, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people find Go and go, this does the same thing, but does it better. And I like it.
Well, Gabe, thank you so much for this time. This has been really enjoyable. I'm going to make sure that we get your Strugglebus Go channel in the episode notes. And yeah, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I'm back chatting with Benkyo again. We discussed some of the more serious tournaments that he participated in during the 2024 season. And we also talked a bit about time controls and what some of his preferred time settings were. If we just take this for a second and go back to the North American Go Federation Pro Qualifier that you participated in this year versus last year, which I believe you were commentating in the
Right.
2023 edition, what was it like attending it as a competitor versus as a commentator?
Yeah, so I commentated actually only one game. It was the finale of Michael Chen versus Eric Lee. It was a pretty small deal, and it's a big deal and a small deal at the same time because there's only 12 of us. There's like families and stuff, and then there's a bunch of like scribes and AGA people and CGA people. It felt very, very small scale, but yet still extremely important. We know a lot of people are watching on Twitch and different places. A lot of people are following the game records, so that was pretty cool. The playroom, you couldn't really hang around in there too much, like when you're done your game, especially in the semifinals and the finals. So people just hang out in the review room to review their games. But yeah, everyone's just focused on that, right? Everyone's focused on what's each other's records and just trying to, it was very stressful. I tried to go into it totally casual, especially because I don't think I'm up to the level yet to really be the winner of the pro qualifier, right? Not yet.
Mhm.
I'll keep trying though. I went into it with no real expectations, maybe just trying to get to the semifinals. But despite my casual approach, I felt that the pressure was like nothing I ever felt before.
Wow.
Yeah. I had a pretty blundery tournament, unfortunately. Some good games, actually. Like, I actually gained confidence both from this and the Canadian Open that I just got back from today. But way more giant blunders than usual in a lot of games that I was kind of winning or had a good position. So, but that's whatever. It's kind of like losing streaks, right? When you experience enough of them, you're just used to it. It's just like a weather change, right?
To be a Go player is to be familiar with losing streaks.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's more than other hobbies or sports, but yes, the losing streak is pretty common. So that's actually an interesting point you make, because this concept of making big blunders. So I'm trying to remember who was commentating this year for the pro qualifier while you were playing or somebody else was playing, and they were saying, oh, the time settings they had set was a 75-minute main time with 5 1-minute byoyomis, I believe. And the hope there, and I'm going to preface this by saying that we all know Go is very, very hard, and the level of reading and positional judgment that you're doing at your level is incredible. And at the same time, having the 75 minutes and those longer byoyomis was to try to reduce the chances of there being, massive blunders.
Yeah.
Like you said, this is a high pressure, high stakes tournament.
I was surprised. Yeah. 1-minute byoyomis. And still, this was happening to me. In the Go Congress last year, it was my first Congress, and I played in the Masters. I had a loss by default to start off with because of airport stuff, but I felt okay with my 3-3 that I ended up with and some of the games. Awesome. But the pressure, so even with the 30-second byoyomi, whatever that was, versus the 1 minute times 5, I think that we had here, yeah, it should have made a huge difference, and I should have been able to avoid those ridiculous blunders. And blunder is different from a mistake, right? Blunder is like, on the one hand, 100% part of my strength, part of my skill, have to accept. But, a mistake is something that's a natural product of your skills, right? A blunder is also that, but it's like something that's ridiculous, right? Like self-atari or...
Yeah, like the famous YouTube clip of the Japanese pro, like oh God, that's so good. Yeah, exactly. So with that time setting, and then comparing it to the Canadian Open, was there one time format you preferred? What's your ideal time setting if you had one?
Well, my ideal is no time limit.
Yeah.
I have infinite patience for Go, actually.
Because I know it's different for everyone. You would say, hey, I would actually keep focusing on the game for ad infinitum. Whereas other people like myself, it also might be just a product of my ability to concentrate. But it's like after so much time, a certain amount of time, I'm just not going to be able to keep going. But I am slow as a player personally. So I can't do blitz is good practice for me.
Yeah, I feel like from experience, when I have enough time, which I think the Congress was close to that, like an hour and a half each, right? Main time, I can play even a loss that I'm very satisfied with. There's some games where there wasn't anything that I wanted to change, even when I lost. And then, every mistake that I made was like 100% the most like learning point kind of thing that you could ever have, right? Because you truly put your full power in. That's the kind of games I love. That's why I envy those kind of pro games and old historical games that have like hours and hours and hours.
Yeah, so there's a value in that. But the fact that you can have a game where you're like, wow, I lost this game, and going through it, like I wouldn't have played anything differently, or every move I played I felt was really solid. It was sound. It made sense. Is a takeaway that you then need to make sure there are still long time control situations or tournaments, because I feel like if you go one way with trying to make things maybe more enticing and more popular to other people, you're probably going to shorten the time.
Right.
And tradition, right? How the Japanese set up and those sorts of things when they used to do these like multiple day matches,
Right.
Weren't they all about like purity of I'm going to find like the move, or I'm really going to have more time to figure it out?
Right. Very kind of ritualistic in a way. And yeah, it's different from modern Go in a way, right? So
Yeah.
I'm okay actually with just like an hour and a half each or something, but that's still very long, right? An hour and a half. Or in the European Go Congress, which it'll be my first this year, it's maybe there's like 2 hours each.
What prompted you to do both this year?
Well, it's going to be exciting to meet a lot of people and check out what the European Go scene is like in person and meet some of my students who are over there. Also, like it's for business too, right? In a way.
Do you have a lot of students in like Germany or France or places like this?
Yes. Yeah. There's a good chunk of them from Europe. I would guess something like 30% or something like that. It's 40, 50% US. And then, yeah, maybe 20 to 30% is European, maybe more. And then at least 40% is probably US. And then there's some Canadian, and then there's a few outliers.
I wanted to talk a little bit about my recent and new foray into Correspondence Go. And for those of you who don't know, correspondence means playing turn-based Go. So you're not playing live, you're not sitting and having a time control that's in a matter of minutes or even an hour. It's in a matter of multiple hours or multiple days. I wanted to give it a try. I haven't played it at all until now. Originally, my excuse for not playing was because I didn't want to have to constantly be worrying about it, thinking about it, or I didn't feel like I had the time. And I was really able to say, you know what? I have a ton of moments in my life where I'm taking a pause from work or I'm taking a pause from doing things at home. I would love to check out a game, and it would get me playing games, because my issue has been I'm not playing enough games, or I'm not playing as many games as I want to. And so I was able to do this. And if you go on the online Go server, which is what I use, you have to figure out what time setting you want. And this is a really key part of it. And what I've found is that right now I was starting with the 1 day a move setting. Some people will use the Byoyomi, where you have like a main time of maybe a week, and then you have 3 periods of a 1 day a move resetting Byoyomi. But to me, that felt really, really, really long. I kind of wanted to avoid having these games go forever and ever. And I didn't want to have 50 games going at a time, which is what a lot of people do, which is great. But for me, that didn't work. Right now, I'm feeling like 3 to 4 to 5 games at a time is really nice. The shortest time setting I was finding was actually 12 hours per move. And that's what I've been sticking with. It seems to be working for me. I really enjoy getting into little periods of the day where the opponent is on at the same time as me, and instead of getting in 1 move a day or 2 moves a day, we get in 5 or 6 or 7 moves, like a little skirmish that happens. And so I really enjoy that. It's been super fun. The other side to it, though, is that it's actually been also kind of frustrating at times. So let me start with the enjoyable stuff. So first, I noticed that I do a lot more conscious and subconscious reading out of the board. Not only reading sequences of moves, but also just rolling over the overall board in my head when I'm doing other things. So for example, when I was at a wedding this weekend for my wife's friend, I would notice that at idle moments where we weren't doing anything, just sitting around, in my head, I'd be looking at that board and saying, okay, what could I be doing? Or if my opponent plays this, where's the next spot I should be playing in the end game? And it is helping me see the board overall more. Whereas when I play a game of a main time of 10 minutes or 20 minutes and it's a live game, I'm not having that as much. There's just not as much time to process. So I get to savor the game a bit more, and in the certain state or moment in a game a bit more. The other side to that is if I'm in a moment in the game where I feel like it's not going well, or I feel like I made a bad move, it also makes me live in that moment for a bit longer. So that's not so fun. It's definitely a dopamine hit. I mean, I feel like I start to develop some habits that are not so healthy around compulsively looking at my phone every 2 seconds, especially when I'm at home. My wife has noticed this, and I've noticed this as well. So we've started to make a rule that I leave my phone over where the charger is in the office. That has actually helped out a lot because I've gotten a little bit less compulsive about it. So there are a couple things that I've noticed would really help the situation for me at least, which is when I play a correspondence game, I need to be very aware of when I am creating that custom challenge. Because if I create it in the morning and somebody takes my game, I'm finding that because the online Go server is such an international server and I'm in America, I will get a lot of players that are overseas. And a lot of times they will be 7 hours ahead of me or 12 hours ahead of me. And it will start to create a little bit of a challenge because they will be most active in playing when it is maybe the morning my time or later in the night my time. And that might not work with my schedule because I'm working during the day and these sorts of things. So I still need to figure that out. But that would be really cool if you could somehow control for who is accepting your games and what time zone they were in. But that's pretty specific and maybe a bit too much. I feel like I actually play at a higher rank when I play correspondence. On the one hand, this makes a lot of sense. I have more time to think through my moves. Therefore, I should be more careful with my moves, and I should be making less of the stupid mistakes that I make when I play live games. But I'm wondering, is this true for you? Is this true across the board? Like, are most people better at longer games? I have heard some stories where people don't like having too much time either, and that can be too boring or just be too intense for them. I have to say, I've recently been playing these correspondence games with players that are a few ranks stronger than me, and it has made the games very challenging. All of a sudden, I'm navigating 2 or 3 or 4 games that are a bit more intense and complicated than I'm used to. And because it's correspondence, I have more time to think about it. The cognitive load feels quite a bit heavier. It doesn't feel like in the live game where you're only in it for that 20 to 30 minutes and it's over. This is sort of like following you. And so I'm still getting a sense for that. I need to take breaks between having sets of correspondence games. My current strategy for playing games now has been to kind of barbell it, which means play some correspondence games, but then also play some live games that are shorter, like a 10-minute May time with 3 30-second Byoyomis. And that way I can kind of get this alternating of having a lot of time to think through moves and states of the game versus not having a lot of time and trying to play good shape moves and see the flow of the stones on the board and those sorts of things. Because if I've learned anything so far from the Go community, it's that there's value in having those alternating perspectives. The final thing that I would add to my thoughts on correspondence is that it does bring down my game stress. So whereas before I would get so intense when a live game would start, it's desensitized me a bit, and that's been really nice. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts on correspondence games. If you haven't played it, I highly recommend it. If you used to play it and you just got sick of it, maybe give it another go. Try it out again. Maybe the time settings are more useful to you or the variations in time settings. Give it a try. Now we're going to have a little more of a conversation with Go organizer Devin Fraze. I enjoyed our conversation so much from last season that I had to ask him back, and he was more than happy to entertain my questions. So first, we're going to start with what it means to be a Go organizer, and he's also going to tell us about why it's so important to have your local Go club. What does it mean to be an organizer in the world of Go?
Yeah, this is my favorite topic. When talking to people who've known me for a long time, they've noticed I haven't kept getting stronger, maybe a little bit. I said, well, my goal is no longer to become a pro Go player, but I'd love to become a pro organizer. The journey started for me back when I came back to Columbus after all my traveling, and the club started to transition away from the guy who taught me Go, and he was the main organizer, and he was the president of the Columbus Go Club before. And so when he stepped down and kind of, slowly faded away, I stepped into this vacuum of power, but I've always been more of an egalitarian sort. And so instead of calling myself president, I created the title lead organizer. And the main idea with that is simply that I want to be
inviting others to step up to the plate of organizer as well. We can be co-organizers and work together. And then really I saw my position not as just a dictatorial or benevolent leader like president, per se, like who is kind of the locus of power, but rather a facilitator of the weekly meetups and tournaments and any other activities the club is doing to help, our players come together. And so that's why I use the term organizer and why I love that term so much.
You've described the local Go club as sort of the lifeblood of the Go community, and that it's a very instrumental part of building awareness of Go in the West. What are some best practices for other people who want to set up their own Go club where they live?
For sure. Just to quickly recap, I believe that for especially new players, the magic moment that hooks them into Go is when they come to club and not only find that this game that they're intrigued about is fun and they get the chance to learn more, but also that they create the connections and build friendships and community, and then they realize this is something they can keep doing over and over again for a very long time. Because that philosophy of how do we create new players is born, I believe that also should inform how we run our Go clubs in the West. And so for best practices, one of the things that I always lean into is thinking about this new player and also the returning players. So how do you create a warm, welcoming environment? You, of course, want to do things like choosing good locations where people feel comfortable, sometimes locations that have food that can be important to players, locations that are quiet. If you choose a noisy location, Go players don't always love that. And yet also, I know clubs that meet up in bars, and part of that can be the social aspect. So then it's kind of more fun. You get to drink. I've noticed that generally Go players don't always love drinking, but I think if the organizer or, whoever's running that night's club enjoys drinking, that can be something else to draw certain types of Go players in. So creating a space that is enjoyable to be in, whatever that is. That also leads to some tensions. That means as an organizer, you actually have to defend that space very carefully. If someone comes in and starts to disrupt that space, they are not kind of abiding by the social conventions. They're not being friendly. They're not having a certain disposition. If they're like, just yelling all the time and stuff like that, and it's disturbing the other players, you actually have to get out of your comfort zone, gently go talk to that person, pull them aside, and have a tough conversation and say like, hey, listen, we really like you. We want you here. If you do like them. We actually had one player who was coming to our club, and we also had a small child who's gotten older and he's in college now and he's still part of the club. And we've, maintained him all these years. But early on, there was someone that came in. I guess he had a lot of brothers or something, kind of came from like a more, rough and tumble background. And so he just, was really being overly playful with this kid and perhaps even on the point of mean. And I actually heard from the parents that like, hey, this kid's feeling like really bad and like doesn't want to come to club anymore because of this person. At that point, I felt bad because I'd seen it and I felt uncomfortable. I didn't say anything, but by that time it had gone too far. And I actually took the person aside before he came into the next meetup. I stopped him at the door. I said, hey, listen here, man, I'm so sorry to tell you this, but you're no longer welcome here. And it's not that you're a bad person. But just like it's made some of our key members feel uncomfortable. And of course you can maybe change, but like I've let this get too far. And if I had talked to him earlier, I think we wouldn't have had to do that talk, but I let it happen over and over again, just kind of hoping, players will defend for themselves and stuff like that, instead of taking on this role of host. And that also means doing the hard stuff too. So that was key. So putting the club first, putting your regular members first and stuff like that. And, it's your job as organizer to do the hard stuff. So that also means making calls when to cancel clubs and stuff like that. And I think being kind of firm and concise and well-reasoned in your choices and explaining those reasons to your members can help a lot. If you want to change nights or locations or stuff like that, you should, of course, talk things out with people first. Again, I don't try to be the dictator. And so I did like a survey the first time I ever moved our location from a popular spot we were at, but it started to get too noisy. The parking was getting bad, stuff like that. So we moved to a tea shop and it worked out a lot better. And
have you had to move around a lot or no?
No, we moved to the tea shop about 10 years ago. What I did is I did a survey of our members and I also asked them about things like days of the week. And I asked them about where they lived. I said, hey, give me your address. I'm going to make a map. I'm going to plot where we are. And then I'm going to try to find the location that makes it easiest for all of us. And I found a spot that actually worked for everyone but me. But I'm like, okay, I'm willing to make the drive.
That's called sacrifice.
Yeah. So we moved to the tea shop and people instantly loved it. I've also noticed kind of a hot tip for clubs is doing new activities. So changing locations, or saying, hey, this week we're going to have a guest lecturer, or hey, this week we're going to review a fun pro game or something that just happened in like some cup or something. And then broadcasting it to your club through an email list or some other way, that can actually drive a lot of re-engagement and interest. It's good to do that every so often. It can actually really reinvigorate a lot of clubs. And I think a lot of clubs can get stale because you think, oh, well, your players are coming. It's just another week. If I skip this week, it won't be a big deal because, I'll see them the next week. But that can also start to avalanche in a way of, someone comes and they say, oh, man, like, hey, John skipped this week. Gosh, maybe I should skip too. Like, I like
Right.
John and now he's not here. So like that kind of reinvigoration every once in a while is good, and also gives players reasons to come other than just playing their game, which we all love. Playing in person is beautiful, but still.
That's all the time we have for this episode. And the question I want to leave you with is, have you had a chance to go to your local Go club or Go gathering? Check out Baduk.club, check out the American Go Association, and if there isn't anything, try to start one yourself. I'll talk to you next time.